Thank you very, very much for coming. I understand that many of you have been already to some of the events that the Queen of Stones has set up for this particular project. And I've been out of the country, which is awful because I've missed all the fun. But I got to have the fun of this. This evening, I'm talking to Matsui Akira, who is a treasure in all kinds of ways and in all kinds of places. I will read you his official biography in case you haven't seen the website. He is a master actor teacher of the Kita School of Japanese classical Noh theatre, born in 1946 and began studying Noh at the age of 7. He showed such talent that at age 12, he became a live-in apprentice to Kita Minoru, the 15th generation of Noh masters in the Kita school. This is one of the 5 guilds of shite main Noh actors. From his firm foundation in tradition, Matsui has experimented in intercultural fusions. He has acted in productions of plays by Shakespeare, W.B. Yeats, and Beckett, and has written plays based on Rashoman and Hoichi. Together with American Noh composer-performer Richard Emmert, who is here, he has created a series of English Noh, including St. Francis, At the Hawk's Well, and Eliza. In addition, he has choreographed noh-style dances to jazz ballads and to poetry by T.S. Eliot. In 1998, he was designated an important intangible cultural asset by the Japanese government. In 2016, Matsui was awarded an honorary doctorate by the Royal College in London. He is stated as a Noh master and for his long record of achievement in bringing Noh to new international audiences. I am Margaret Coldiron. I'm a Noh scholar, and I have had the pleasure and privilege of knowing these 2 gentlemen for quite some years now. I even had the pleasure, it's gone on my Facebook page, of being Matsui sensei when he was working with Eugenio Barba. He needed to coach his dresser in how to dress him, but he couldn't coach and be being dressed at the same time. So I became the mannequin. I'm a little taller, but otherwise I think the costume fit. I'm going to be talking with Matsui Sensei about his life and his work, and I think that there will also be plenty of space for questions from the audience, because I'm sure that you will also have questions. And just to alert you that on Friday, there is going to be a whole day of events related to this, involving Matsui Sensei, involving Kitazawa-san, the master mask maker who's just slipped in the back, and as well as Dr. Ashley Thorpe from Royal Holloway University, who is both a Noh scholar and a Noh performer. I'm just going to do a book plug, because we now have 2 authors here, which is a beautiful book on Noh and Kyogen masks carved by Kitazawa-san. This is by Jeanette Chong, who has arranged all these events, and Richard Emmert. And I have had a chance to look through it, and it is magnificent. So I strongly urge you to get yourselves a copy. So we're here. Thank you, Matsui Sensei. I think this is an important question. What was it that drew you to Noh? As a 7-year-old, what had you seen?
いや、一番最初はやはり4つの時です。7とは言ってますけれど。
Yeah, I know.
素人だ。
I'm going to be translating for Matsui Sensei. He said, actually, he was 4 years old as more as an amateur when he said it was 7. In fact, he was 4 years old when he first started learning himself.
その何歳っていうのは初舞台、職部の先生に習っての初舞台から言ってます。
And so he's saying that from Nanatsu, that's what I was saying. So he was at 7 years of age when he was on stage.
それからいいですか。これでなぜ習い出したかというのは、私おばあさんが大体歌舞伎とか演劇が好きだったですね。
His grandmother really loved theater, but sort of particularly kabuki, and so he had that sort of interest.
で、私がやはり子供の時こういう体でもっと細かったんで、体が弱かったんでとても。
As a child, he was quite rather weak as a child and very thin.
で、近所のお医者さんによく行ってたもんですから、そのお医者さんが、スポーツはこの子はできないだろう。
And so he went to a neighborhood doctor, and they said that probably sports is not so much fit for what he should do or could do.
で、私がその先生が歌いをやってたから。
And so that particular doctor also did chant in Noh.
歌い声を出せと。
And so he told him, you need to use your voice and sing out very strong.
それが最初のきっかけでした。
And so that was what prompted him to become to study Noh for the first time.
So you began by studying chant.
はい、歌いから始めました。肩は後です。
Yeah, you started by chant.
And then dance. Does the dance training start right away, or do you start with chant?
もう歌いが3年ぐらい続いたですかね。前はだから輪島先生って大阪から家元の親戚の方が偉い先生が教えに来るっていうことで。
So he was learning from this Wajima sensei who was coming from, he lived in Wakayama, and so this teacher was coming from Osaka there. だからすぐ前もやりました。
はい、その時は輪島先生に前が入る。
So he started learning dance from this Wajima sensei. I think he first started singing, doing chant, and then after a short period of time he started learning
その
dance.
先生はね、歌いを教えなかったんです。僕には絶対子供だから。
Yeah, he said that teacher would not teach him chant because he was still a child.
その先生は声が非常にポリープを手術して失敗したもんだから、ってものすごい枯れた声だったんで。
Because he himself had a voice that he had developed a polyp on his throat, and his voice was not very strong either. So.
でもその先生の本当素晴らしいのは気合で歌えるんですよ。
But in turn, that when he sang, this is his teacher, he really had to sing with a lot of strength to get a voice, to make a strong voice and when he performed.
など教えなかったっていうのはやはり子供だから真似をすると。
And he said he didn't want to teach him because he was afraid that he would imitate his voice, and that's not the voice he wanted him to sing.
ですから大人の人には歌いもみんな教えてました、その先生は。
But he was teaching adults, and sort of these are amateur adults. He was teaching, but would not teach him.
ずっと違う先生でした。
But he always learned chant from a different teacher at that point.
I'm going to throw something in that we haven't discussed. But children who perform in Noh have a very distinctive way of doing the chant. Do you think you can imitate that?
いや、お方は何しろ僕たち子供の時は大声を出せ。
He said the important thing is they always learn when you sing chant as a child is always sing in a loud voice.
ですから子供の時高い声で、さてまうしばかわーってこんなんでしたね。
So that's the kind of imitation, very, very strong, very high voice.
何しろ可愛く。
And he said, you need to look cute to a certain degree, and so sing in a very strong voice.
子供は上手にしたら味がない。
He said, don't try and be skilled because there's no, what he would say, there's no flavor he's using that for a child. It's better to just be loud and strong.
This is what one sees in children's performances. I always find it very striking that they blast your ears out, those little kids. They are extraordinary. How did you come then to train with Kita Minoru?
ミノル先生は本当に稽古熱心でした。家元にしては。他の家元と比べたら。稽古が好きでした。
稽古が好き。Okay, he said, Minoru, Kita Minoru, he's not quite answering your question, but he said Kita Minoru really liked practice and teaching and sort of practice.
僕の場合はうちですっていうのは7人家元に住んでました。
So there were 7 students who were living in Kita Minoru's home at the time. There were 7 other, including him, 7 students who were living disciples.
他は外から東京に住んでる人が。
There were others coming who would come every day, but they lived maybe at home. They lived in Tokyo and they would come. But there were 7 who actually lived in Kita Minoru's home.
ですからその7人というのはみんな地方の人ばっかりです。
So all 7 of them were from outside of Tokyo.
家元の家から学校へ通うわけですから中学高校。
And so in junior high school and high school, he would go to school from the head of the schools, the head of the Kita guild, as you had said, or Kita school home. So he would go back and forth to school. And they would always have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning.
で何をするかって言ったらね、近くのお豆腐屋さんへ行くんですよ。
And the first thing they would do is go to a nearby tofu seller's shop.
早く起きないとその水が捨てられていくから。
Because they wanted to get water, and if they don't go early, they could not get the water from the tofu ya.
その水をみんな何人かで汲んで、それがまず舞台の掃除です。
And so there would be a couple of people that would help carry the water back to that, and then they would clean the stage with this tofu water.
ちょうどいい滑りになるんですね、豆腐の水で。
If you use tofu water, the way that you could slide on the nose stage was very good.
お体と滑りすぎる。
Yeah.
お体昔吹いてたんです。
If you use what Okada is sort of tofu a little bit more developed, if you use that, it doesn't work as well. So.
で、卵はね、牛乳入れたりもしてました。牛乳。
Oh, sometimes they use milk as well. Yeah, that's what they used to do that, but sometimes the stage would get a little white when they would do that. And it was sort of, so you mean, he said there were times when it was a bother to actually go to the tofu shop to get the tofu water, and so they would use milk some of the time. And so because they would put it in with water as well.
掃除してから100番姉妹っていうのをして学校へ行かなきゃならないんです。100番姉妹、1年でまず100番姉妹。
So it was after that you would have practice, and they would learn what is called shimai. These are short dances from no plays. And the point that in a year, they were supposed to learn 100 dances.
それから学校、それからまあ、昼帰ってきてから学校組っていう稽古です。
And so after that, and they would have a shimai practice in the morning, then they would go to school. But then when they come back from school, I assume in the early afternoon, there would be the group that would have a group lesson at that time.
で、6時頃終わって食事した次の月曜日から林の芸、月火水木
And
林
so
の芸が始まります。
they would have practice up until around 6 o'clock in the evening, and then oftentimes they would have to go to study instruments as well too. The instruments, they're not going to be specialists in playing the 4 instruments that they used to know, but they needed to know them, so they would go to teachers thereafter.
そういう稽古が本当毎日でした。
And so that was what they did pretty much every day.
Well, this is it. My students at East 15 Acting School, where I teach and give a tiny introduction to Noh, they're always very surprised when I say, yes, what you need to do is get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, wash the stage with milk, and then you practice, and then you carry on practicing, and then you go to school, and then you carry on practicing. They realize that Noh is a way of life. And I think it's interesting too, that not too many people realize how the noh-style, the leading actor, really has to learn to do everything from the bottom up. Would you say that's so?
はい、やはり人間っていうものはね、芸だけじゃダメなんですよ。やはり人生を学ばないとダメだということがあるんです。
So you really need to learn. He said you can't just learn that. You also have to learn how to be, well, he said life. You know, you have to learn life in that process.
それがやはり芸に現れてくるのはまあ年取ってからで。
And he said that in turn is a part of how his art develops after that. And that's the way of thinking that, you know, studying with, I think the assumption they're studying with the head of the school, that, you know, not only are studying that, they are living with the head of the school. There are various things that they have to do, activities they have to do, but slowly that becomes a part of what eventually their art can grow into. That helps their art grow.
そうですね、今になって分かるのはやはり拭き掃除って言うんですけどね、舞台をこうしかがめて木じゃないですから。
Says when they're washing the stage, they're not using a mop. They're using towels to push on the floor, and so this is getting down on the floor and pushing across the floor. It's not mopping the
だか
floor.
ら腰の入れ方。
And
それを
so
勉強させてるのかなと思い出しま
So this is really also teaching you how to really put intensity and strength into your hips and how you can make your posture really strong as you wash the floor by being down on your basically down and wiping the floor in that particular manner. Not this way, but actually pushing as you go down one end, pushing back and forth. So
ですから流儀によるんですけどね、日本舞踊でしたら腰を入れるって言わずに腰を折る、こう肘を折って入れてるわけですよね。
he said it depends a little bit, no, and maybe Nihon Byo is the kind of dance that it sort of forms the basis of kabuki. Said the way you develop your body, it's a little bit different when Nihon Byo, there's a little bit more where you bend your knees.
僕たちは腰を引く方です、北流は。
But
関税はまた別。
the Kita school, the Kita style, is they really push in, I would say, from the hip. And really, he says it's a little bit different in different schools of Noh even. But the Kita school tries to do this where they turn their hips just a little bit to make it very strong.
ですからね、北流は腰を引く、スキーと同じだって言えば、前にこう、スキーがこうでしょ。
So it's the same as skiing, for example, he said.
こうじゃ、まあ、
He says you don't just bend your
膝は使いますけどね。
Of course, you use your knees to a certain degree, but not just your knees.
で、相撲もそうだろう。
And it said
相撲
sumo
も
is
こ
the
うやっ
same
て
thing.
回しっていうのがあって、こうじゃないんですね。
With
こう
sumo,
引いてるんですよね。
bend your knees, you really have to be, if you sing the sumo wrestling. Yeah, it says, but it's very easy to, I mein, in order to push something, and sumo, there's a lot of pushing, you need to use your hips. And so pull your hips back is what he was often told. Yeah. So. He says, it's going on a little long.
Okay, because this is important to know. I don't think people who watch Noh realize how intensely physical it is. What sort of power is required, especially by the hips. If you have participated in any of their Noh workshops, you'll soon find out that after the first day, your hips are killing you.
やはりバレエと同じで子供の時やるからこそこう変えるんですよね、バレエダンサーでも。
It's sort of like in ballet, ballet, when they're quite young, obviously students have to keep their feet out. And these are something you have to learn, and you start doing this when you're quite young. He says there are similar kinds of things, he
で
suggests.
も今はもう20歳の頃から60、50の人でも習いに来ますから。
But nowadays, there are people, amateur students who come, they might start at the age of 20, but even some people starting much older than that, some people starting at the age of 60. He said there are people who come and start studying with him.
だから構えでもそうですけれど、見えないとこで子供の時からこうやって返されるんです。
And so when there are certain plays, certain things that you don't see when you have costume on, you turn the elbow out. And so the elbow, so for example, you can put the elbow out. And so it's very important you try and put cups on your elbows and then on your head and being able to walk without dropping anything. And you need to do this. It's really learning how to turn your elbows out. And so the teacher would, from behind, really turn his arms out. And so this is very important to turn your arms. And then, as you learn to hold that out, you then learn to turn the wrist back in and keep the elbow out as well. And so from outside, you don't see it. And if you leave it in, you'll get wrinkles in your kimono. But if you turn your elbows out, you don't get so much in terms of wrinkles in your kimono.
Okay, put this in the lesson. You remember this, Sakura? Yeah. Now, when Zeami talks about training the Noh actor, he says that the child has, well, that kind of quality of kawaii, that they're very cute and they're very sweet, but this isn't the flower. And then you get into adolescence and the voice changes and Zeami gives the impression that you kind of give up when people are adolescents because they're just a mess. And then they can take it up again when they just get past that hump, as it were. What do you think about that? When did you feel you began to be an adult actor?
いや、大人の稽古、子供からずっとそのままで家元を出るまではもう家元は絶対自分で作るな。
So the head of the school always said, don't try and create yourself. Just do. I mean, I think the assumption is just do what he's teaching you.
何しろもう俺の目の黒い口は出てからはもう大人になったら勝手だけれど。
Yeah, he says once you leave the head of the school, the Iemoto's home, you can do what you want. But while you're there, you're not trying to be skills. You're just following his direction, I think the implication is.
最初ですから基本。
And his teacher, particularly the basics, always do the basics, always follow the basics.
でも20歳ぐらいになってからなるとどうしても色を見せよう、上手に見せようと思ってくるんです、子供。
He says about when you turn 20, though, you want to show, oh, that you actually have skill. So you start trying to do other things to make your, to sort of show your abilities.
そうしたらもう家元は怒って。
And then the head of the school gets angry and said, no, just do
ダメとは言わ
the
ない。
basics.
ダメとは言わない。
He doesn't tell him, don't, okay. He says, he doesn't tell him, don't do that, but he just becomes very quiet. You know that he,
怖いですよ、だから余計に。
he says, when he becomes very quiet, then he's actually more scary when the,
悪いなら悪いって言ってくれれば分かりやすい。
he says, if it's bad and he tells you it's bad, that'd be better. But a lot of times he doesn't tell you that, or he didn't tell him that. So,
まあ怒られてうちが花だってよく言われましたから、みんなから、仲間からね。怒られてうちが花。怒られなかったら終わり。
if he gets angry and he scolds you, that is really good in many ways because he really is concerned about it. If he's just quiet, then that's a little more scary.
ですから今では本当に何払って言われるから大変でしょうね、教えるのは。家元は。
So really, you know, what the head of the school would say, you know, and not saying anything, I think was becoming a little more scary than what he said. When you know, did not say anything. So
今だから教えにくくなったでしょうね、大学の先生。
he says, but it's a lot more difficult to teach in that particular
な
manner.
んかもう大学の生徒で、すみません、ちょっと手を触らせてくださいって言わないといけない前で。
And so, for example, he said he's taught college students and he has to say, okay, please, I'm going to move your arms and everything like that. There was no asking on the, on the part of the head of the school.
It's a sort of physical discipline.
はい。
The shite does more than just pop out on stage and be a star. There are lots of different things you have to do as a shite. Is that not right? In the chorus and assisting the other performers? Can you talk about that a bit?
能の一番面白いとこはその音楽が助けてくれるところ、渋滞が助けてくれるところが多いんです。ですからしてがある程度動かされるわけ。それで身体表現がしての役目。
So he said that one of the things that's interesting about Noh is the music, and it's the music that helps, that moves him, you know, and so the actor is really this sort of action that is activated by the music. It's the music that activates
ですからまあ、世阿弥の言う家電書の中にもね、利権の権、千間っていう間があるんです。千間。
Yeah, and so there is something that Zeami writes about, Niken no Ken, is being able to see yourself from outside and having that distance to while you're performing, being able to see yourself perform.
ですから稽古の利権の権は自分の稽古のうちに自分がなりきるわけです。
And so while you're practicing, you can practice fully what you're doing.
でそれを今後もう一つ離れてから自分を見ろと。
But as you get better, you want to watch yourself is what it is. When you're just practicing, you're just practicing. But later on, you have to be able to see yourself and how you.
ですから何しろカットしていかなきゃならない。自分で考える。カット。
何を？
型を。
Oh, kata. Okay.
気持ちもね、自分ができた型を。
So he's saying individual patterns. You have to learn these patterns individually and do them correctly.
そうしていくと千間ができてくるんです。千間。
So, sen no ma.
線路間というのは絵でもそうです。白の空間ありますよね。全部描いちゃうんじゃなくって、じっとこう立ってるのが線路です。でもそれが一番強いんです。
Okay, so in a sense, what he's suggesting is that you're the strongest when you, well, first of all, connecting to seeing yourself, but when you create extra space around yourself and that you're not necessarily always fully performing, that you have the ability to see and sort of create this space around you in how you perform.
そのセルマを見せるのは一番大事なのは動と静、静の中の動になってきます。
And so when you're just standing, that's when you should be the strongest, he's saying. But then there's also something within movement, you have to have stillness. Within stillness, you need to have movement as well too.
Yes,
There's a sort of koan there.
Right.
But this is true. There is a kind of power in the no actor, this idea of presence, which is a very popular thing in theatre studies, is presence. How do you create presence on stage? And certainly for the no actor, he's really commanding the whole stage. I mean, Matsui sensei is quite a slim and petite individual, but when he is playing a character, a warrior, even some of the women characters, even very refined women characters, he takes up a lot more space, not so much physically as psychically, with that quality of presence. And you feel that inside, yeah?
はい、やはり自分は小柄っていうのが一つの売りなんです。
He said one thing that he likes to sell about himself is that he's small.
大きな人を可愛く見せるってなかなか難しいです。
He said it's very difficult for someone who's quite large to sell themselves as cute.
例えば能面いくらかけてでもここがバカーンと出てる人とか。
You wear a mask and the face sort of sticks out the side. It doesn't, the image is not so as
でも
good.
上
It's
手な
more
人だった
difficult.
ら、まあ上手な人だったらそれでもまあ見る方は。
But still, even someone who is really a very good performer learns to, I think you would suggest, learns to use what he has and able to do that. And so even someone who's larger can learn how to
ですから僕なんか小さいからこそ大きいことはできるんです。
And because he's small, he can actually do large roles. Is what
大
he
きな
said.
人が大きなことやっても当たり前になる。
You know, someone who's big can do large roles. Of course, you would expect that.
小さいものが舞台で大きく見せるって言ったら、あ、すごいですねになるけれど。
And so if you're small and do large roles, you know, people say, oh, wow, you know, that stands out.
でもまあ大きい人が可愛く見せるってなかなか難しい。
But it's difficult for someone who's large to do smaller roles.
脳はまして作り物っていうちっちゃい家とか山とか出てくるんです。
There are various things that are called scudimona. They're props generally made of bamboo or something that would oftentimes be used on stage.
それが大体昔の寸法でできてますから。
And a lot of them are built according to the design or size of what has been passed down traditionally.
私ならもうそのまますぐ外へ出られますけど、大きな人だったらここぐらい
And because he's smaller, when he comes outside of that, opens the side up and goes out of it, he can go straight. He said sometimes people are a little bit taller have to bend just a little bit to go out.
そういう難しさがあるでしょうね。はい。
Okay. What would you say are, well, let's see, they're two-part question. So what would you say are the kinds of roles that you are best suited to? This is a kind of riken no ken question, standing outside yourself. So there's God no, there's warrior, woman,
Well, it's more
crazy women,
miscellaneous.
miscellaneous and demon. So of those five, where in you know, in the theatrical world, say in England, we talk about casting to type. So if people were casting you to type, what would you say from the outside?
僕たちの場合はまあどの役でもしなきゃならない。
So everyone as a no actor has to be able to perform all the roles.
若い時はましても家元が曲を決めてきますから。
And he said when he was young, it was the school that decided what roles he was to do.
ですからまあ選ぶ権利はないんですけれ
He
ど。
had no choice. These are what he had to do.
まあ今でもいろんな会からこの曲を待ってくださいっていう注文で行きますか
And
ら。
but now he says if he's asked to do a role, and so a lot of times there are requests for him to do certain roles.
自分の会でしたらまあ自分の好きな曲を選べます。
But if it's his own, if he's sponsoring a particular performance, then he can choose what performance he wants to do.
ですから僕はどっちかというと小柄だから皆さんお客さんは僕を女物の方が向いてると思って見るから綺麗なように見えるらしいけれど僕自身はあんまり好きじゃないんです。
He said, because he is small, a lot of times people think that he is going to do, it'd be better to do women's roles and do smaller, roles in that way. But in fact, he doesn't particularly like those roles as much.
どっちかというと飛んだり跳ねたりが好きな方
He
です。
said the ones he likes are ones where he jumps a little bit, where he moves around, being again very strong, I would say. Yeah.
ですから分かりやすい脳の方が好きですね。
And so in many ways, he likes no, which it's easier for the audience to understand.
ですからまあものすごいお金まで出して舞いたいなっていう曲はないです。
He says he doesn't necessarily now have, when he does his own performance of something, he doesn't have any particular thing, no, because you sometimes have to pay in order to sponsor your own performance. He doesn't have any favorites right now.
なぜっていうと難しい脳ほど動かないから。
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons is the more difficult no are the ones where you don't move as much.
Yeah. So there are only about 250 plays in the repertoire. So could you pick maybe your top two favorites that you'd like to do?
ストーリーの好きなのと待って好きなのとちょっと違うところがあるんですね。
There's a slight difference between ones he might like as the story goes, but ones he likes to perform as a performer.
Okay.
だから大体嫌いなことを言うと神のは好きじゃないです。
He doesn't particularly like first category no. God no is what he's. だけど高砂をやってる。
それはもう仕方ない。
Yeah, he says he's asked to do Takasago a lot, but which is first category, but he in fact doesn't like God no.
要は神様のコマーシャルしてるもんだから。
He said it's really a commercial for a particular God. He says,
神のコマーシャル。
yeah,
何々神社のコマーシャル。
and it's a
そんな感じだ。
commercial for a particular shrine or something like that.
八幡宮のコマーシャルってそんな感じな曲ですから。
All of them are those kind of commercials.
それから比べると僕はまあ大体4番目もの方が好きです。
He likes fourth category plays more.
こと親と子の愛情とか、ストーリー性があるから。
Things that have a little bit more of a story to them, he likes those a little bit more.
脳の難しいのは3番目ものでしょうね。でも動物それをみんな女に表していくから、柳のせい花のせい、僕たち分からない植物まで人間で表さなきゃならないから難しいです。
some.
3番目ものの梅のせいとかね、花のせいとか。
The third category plays, they also have the spirit of a plum or the spirit of
Iris.
iris or cherry blossoms or something like
で
that.
すからその感
He
情が
doesn't like those as much. He likes fourth category.
遊行でも西行桜でも案外難しい曲に
And so some of those
とか。
third category plays particular are quite difficult. And he said they don't have as much movement. They're more difficult for an audience member too. And so they're a little bit more, he doesn't find them as interesting for him personally.
でもまあそうやっていろいろ勉強していくうちにいろいろ分かってきまして。
But he's been able to study a lot of different plays, and he comes to understand quite a lot about.
ぜひソワーズでベケット来てください。
Yeah, he's now doing Samuel Beckett. Please come to SOAS and see his performance of Samuel Beckett.
随分変わった演出をしております。
And he's doing quite a special sort of interpretation of Samuel Beckett.
まあベケットを読んだ人ならわかるけれど。
There are some people who probably have read Samuel Beckett and will probably understand
ノ
what
ー
he's
トさん
doing.
でしてと脇って分かれてうまくできてるんですよ。
And
してと脇。脇がしてを呼ぶ。
yeah.
それに分かれてしてが出る。
And so what is very common in No is that you have a shite, the main actor, and waki, a kind of a secondary actor, oftentimes a traveler. It's the waki who calls forth the shite.
ベケットの場合のロカバイは声はテープです。
But Beckett is done originally in such a way, this is rockabye, this particular performance, is the voice is a tape. What originally Beckett had it was a tape recording that would be playing by the actor.
女は一人こう座ってるだけですね、揺れて。
And so the woman is sitting in a rocking chair.
ですから私の場合は見えないものを見させて、見えたものを出さすっていう方法でロカバイを作りました。
So he said that he's trying to show something that you don't see just by watching someone sitting in a rocking chair. He's trying to show what can't be seen instead.
ですから実際座ってる女はいないんです。見えないんです。
So in fact, the way he's doing it, he doesn't, well, he's done it in a couple of different ways, but one of them is he's not sitting in the rocking chair.
これで見えない声だけが反対に見えるところで脇として出てくるんですね。
見えない。
声、テープは見えないでしょ、人は。でもそれが脇として僕の場合は出
And
さ
so,
ですよね。
in a sense, Beckett, of course, had a tape, but he's not doing it that way. He has someone who is actually reading the text, who is on stage. And so that person is really calling him forth. He's calling that person a waki.
脇の歌いによってしてが引きずられていくやり方でやっております。
And so, in a sense, the waki uses the voice and calls forth the shite as well.
その脳の面白さをうまく使いながら。
And so, even in something like Beckett, he is trying to use, in a sense, the no, an interesting part of no in a play that Samuel Beckett.
ですから脳は大体だから幽霊を主人公にしているのは見えない人物であっても見える。
And so, a lot of times in no, the shite is actually portraying, for example, a spirit or a ghost that appears. And so you can see just from that, something you don't see is appearing in a no play.
ですから見えないものまで見させるのが脳なんです。
And so something that you're not supposed to be able to see, you see, in a sense. That's really what no is about. You see a ghost, you see these spirits appear. And so I think that's the connection he's making with the Beckett piece.
だから先ほど言ったユージニオ・バーバがなぜここを読んだかっていうのもわかるんです。
You mentioned something about Eugenio Barba and
Hamlet.
and he was in a play called Hamlet, and this is something how he was used in that play.
どんな役かなと思ったらペスト菌の王様。
And so he was the kind of what he calls pest.
Pestilence.
Pestilence.
Yeah.
He was the king of the pestilence,
見ない菌の
the
役です。
bacteria of pests.
これで町の人を殺していくわけです。殺していくわけで
And
す。
so he used that to kill people on the of a town or something like that.
脳は柳のせいでも蝶のせいでも何でもできるようにペスト菌もできるように考えました。
And so even though he does various other things with no, he had to think about how he was supposed to do that particular thing.
だから
That particular play.
演出も面白かったですよ。だか
And
ら
he says, so that was quite interesting working with this director, Eugenio Barba.
Yes, Barbara, for those of you who haven't seen it, and I've only seen it on video, Barbara's idea probably stems from the line, there's something rotten in the state of Denmark. And Matsui sensei appeared in the costume and mask and character from Uto, no
play.
Yeah, it's a no play, but how do we translate it? He's a man who kills birds.
Yes, right.
Yes. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's one of the first things I saw you in.
そうですね。ウトの衣装で決まったんです。ウトはやはり漁師。
So he danced in the costume of Uto, and this Ryoshi is a hunter and hunts a certain kind of bird, which is called the Uto.
Cormorant.
Cormorant.
That's cormorant.
Yes.
And
そしてなぜそれをウトにしたかというのは、ウトは漁師で、ウトという鳥を取ってたんです。 鳥を取る漁師。
In Uto, this hunter would catch.
これで鳴き声を漁師はどうしたら鳥を取れるかっていうので、子供の鳴き声を真似するようになったんです。
And so the way he could, the hunter did this in the snow play, Uto, is by calling out the cry of a baby Uto is what it was, a baby bird.
餌を渡すときにキャーキャーとか鳴くんです。子供がキャーキャーとか鳴くんです。
Yeah, and so when the baby cries, then the mother would give.
そこを取るように。
And it's then that the hunter would take.
その漁師がやはり死んで地獄に落ちちゃうんですね。
And so the hunter doing that dies and goes to hell for the way he did this and killed these birds.
なぜかというと、やはりそういう殺生をする。獣を殺す殺生をした罪
This
で
is
す。
something because actually in Buddhism, you're not supposed to kill living things in that particular.
そして漁師がその地獄で、そのウトウっていう鳥に目をつつかれたり、もう痛みを。
And so in hell, in turn, the birds attack him more or less.
それを見せていくのがウトウの脳なんだけれど、やはりそのペスト菌っていうのはそれと何か兼ねて人を殺していく。
So he used that when he was working with Eugenio Barba as this connection to the pest. The kin is what they're talking, it's like the bacteria that creates the pestilence.
Yes.
you've you are an unusual no actor. No is very much known for its conservatism and you have really broken out and done some extraordinary things. I think of the Or Hamlet, where you were able to use Uto, but in a completely different context. And one of the first creations of your own that I saw was, I don't know how you titled it, it was Agave from the Bacchae. So the Bacchae of Euripides. Agave is driven mad by the god Dionysos. She and her sisters go to the mountain to worship and dance for Dionysos. Her son is very puritanical and he forbids the worship of Dionysos. And the god Dionysos, appearing in human form, takes him up to the mountain. He sort of hypnotizes him, takes him up to the mountain, dressed as a woman. The women see him, Agave's son, the king, and tear him to pieces. And Matsui sensei did sort of what Noh does. He did the final dance. So he used the story of Agave coming with the head of her son, but not knowing that it's her son, triumphant from the mountain. Can you talk a bit about that?
はい、まあその時のもう忘れてしまったような気はしますけれど。
He said he's pretty well forgotten all about that. Yeah.
そこまでは覚えてないんですけど、やはりああいう新しいとこは見せ場っていうのをどっから作らなきゃなんない。
He says each time he does something like that, you have to create what he says, something that really shows and grabs the audience, will be interesting to the audience.
ですから劇でもそうなんだけど、しょっちゅう同じような型してたらもう面白くはない。
He said if you always do the same patterns all the time, it won't be interesting at all.
もうさあっていう時にこの動作を出しなさいっていうのがあるんですね。
And so there are certain times, oh, okay, he's going to do this movement.
That will suddenly draw the audience in.
これその同じいいからこの型ばっかり作ってるともう飽きが来る。
But if you use the same kinds of patterns, movement patterns all the time, that people will be bored with that.
まあ例えば脳でイグセって15分ぐらい座る時あるんです。
There is something in Noh which is called an iguse, meaning a guse performance where you sit the whole time and for the whole time of a guse while the chorus is singing that, and it might last 15 minutes.
ですからそういう脳の時客は大体寝てるんです。
He said, but the audience is generally falling asleep during that time.
でも不思議、ちょっとした方やった時ずっと目覚めてくれてます。
But if you do just a small kind of movement, then the audience will wake up and pay attention.
じっとしてるからこそほんのちょっとした動きが。
But sometimes when you do some small movement there, then the audience again pays attention. So
面白いところがありますだから。寝ててもなんかいい夢見てるような。
yeah, and it says, of course, sometimes people are falling asleep, but they have a good dream during that time.
ですから脳の眠りっていうのはいい夢だと思ってるから皆さんに寝ても結構ですって言うんです。
He says it's all right if you fall asleep because you generally have a good dream, and you probably, I would add, hear the sound of what's going on, and it's really.
これで夢から覚めて帰れば気持ちがいい。
And he said, at the end, if you wake up and go home, you have a good experience.
それはやはり歌いの力でしょうね。
And that's a lot of that is the power of the chant that also carries you through. Yeah, you're just staying very still, and it's the power of the chant that gives life to that sort of situation.
作りは作りですね。ああいう3番目ものも。
And so, in a sense, a lot of those are third category plays, but they're interestingly made. But sometimes they're more difficult. I mean, he didn't quite say it this way, but they're more difficult for people seeing Noh for the first time.
だからアガベの時もそうでした。どこが大事か、アガベの中で。あとはそんなに型もそんなに作ってるわけでもないんだけど、印象に残れば一個、印象に残る。
So again, agave, what you were saying there really needs to be one or two places that are really impressionable and give a strong impression to the audience. He said,
Yes.
that's what's.
And that big moment is when you, the recognition moment for those classicists out there, when he looks at the face, when she looks at the face of her son and recognizes that it's her child, that she's torn to pieces. So Matsui Sensei worked with a research project on the mask and the actor in ancient theater space, working with models of Greco-Roman helmet masks. And he performed this again, but in a Greek mask that covered his whole head. I use this as a teaching tool with my students to see just how one tiny movement, when he sees that face and knows that it's her son. And it's very striking. But first I saw it done with no masks.
はい。だからやはりこれは能面作家もいるように、いいコンビネーションの面を持ってくるか、使い方をよく知ってなければ、やはり表動かしゃいいっていうもんでもないから。
So I mean, we have a no mask maker here too, and he said, understanding for him, but also understanding for the no mask maker that you don't just move the mask around, that it's these smaller movements that become very strong and become very important in how the no mask is used.
はい。
It's a whole body.
はい、そうですね。
Yeah, he said, of course.
So back to the second part of my question ages ago.
はい。はい。
What role that you've never played would you like to play in the no repertoire?
まあ、あることはいっぱいありますよ。もう、要するに無限ですからね、役っていうのは。
There are still many different roles that he could learn.
ベストまでやってますから。ベストまでやってるからね。
いや、だけど、そういうのじゃなくて、脳の中で
やりたい。
やりたい。
もう大体やったので、あまりやりたい曲はなくって、もうやりたいなら新作で自分で好きな方作る方がいい
He
ですね。
said there aren't classical no plays. There really isn't pieces that he really wants to do now. He says what he would rather do are some of the new no plays where he could create his own choreography, for
そ
example.
れの方が楽ですね。
いいっすね
楽だし面白いし。
And he said that and sometimes is actually easier to do and very interesting as well for him to do.
ちょうどこの間もプレスリーやったばっかしなんで、英語の。
And he wasn't dancing, but he has done the choreography for various things. And we did this play in English, which was based on Elvis Presley. And he was the one who then worked with the choreography for that.
ですから以前なかった場面を何箇所作りましたね。
And so things that have not existed before, he's been able to create a choreography for.
だからプレスリーに見せる方法っていうのもあるわけでしょ。プレスリー、だから杖ついた黒人の方がね、そのスティックをポーンと蹴ってこうする方とかね、マイクで歌う方とか。
There are things that he used and goes into an explanation of what it was all about. But for example, having a walking stick and kicking it and holding it as if it's a microphone that Presley might do, because there was a song, there were lyrics in the piece that suggested that. So it's a sudden change that
まあそういうのはまあ能の方にはないけれど。
says that's not a movement pattern that exists in Noh, for example.
でもまあそういういろいろできるから
But he's able to do various ones like that.
Right. So you've created from European plays, you've made up the life of Elvis. And we're going to see also on Friday, the,
We did.
yeah. Can you tell us?
Kazuraki.
はい。
Kazuraki, but not Kazuraki.
そうですね、ちょうど北沢君が来てくれてたおかげで、まあ、愛嬌芸って言ったら失礼なんですけど、装束を変えなきゃなんない、ロッカーバイから。
Well, what we wanted to do is do a performance in which we could use our mask maker as well. And he says it's sort of like an aikyogen or something, but really it's a role that we have him involved. How could we get him involved in a performance? And
で
that's
すから
what,
普通
what
で
we
した
came
ら
up.
ね、よくやるのは、リックをちょっと吹いて、気をつける間。
There are a lot of times when we've done various things, when it's only been a couple of people. And for example, I play no flute. And he said, so I play something with no flute, maybe while someone else is dressing him, or maybe during when he's actually doing some movement. And we can only have 2 or 3 people. But this time we wanted to use the mask maker, Sawa-san, as well in a performance. How are we going to do
こ
it?
れで数だけになぜしたかっていうと、マスメーカーがいる。
So using him for Kazuraki, he's a mask maker.
それで数だけのしてっていうのは顔が見にくい。
And the thing about Kazuraki is the shite in that has an ugly face. Is what
月の綺麗な夜、外へ出て舞いたい。そう思っても、明るかったら外へ出られない。顔が見にくいから。
because the character in it doesn't want to go out because if their face is ugly, basically
で
is
す
what
か
he's saying.
ら、それをうまくつなげるような脚本を作りました。
So instead, we made it in such a way, so him making a beautiful face for him to
予
wear.
告編見てからの。
Yeah, he said, you need to come and see it.
Yes, yes, I think that will be clear. I've been dominating the discussion here, and I'm sure that there are some of you who might have your own questions for Matsui Sensei. Would you like to ask anything of him, or indeed of Richard? Yes.
Thank you very much. That was absolutely exciting to hear this discussion. And there are so many things I'd like to ask, but one thing I'll try to limit myself is I understand from the way Matsui Sensei described the way he works that the performance is not set. That he has a series of patterns. He has patterns that he can use, apply, but each performance is going to be different, almost as though there is a little element of freedom and improvisation. Have I misunderstood?
It's complicated. Not improvisation, probably as you and I think
No,
of
I
it.
use that very loosely.
There is a choreography. Do you want to elaborate?
はい、大体はもう肩って脳は本当に不思議とまあインドネシアのバリダンスなんかやってるけど肩が多いんですよ。
He says, we have actually in Noh a great variety of different movement patterns. That's what kata are.
日本舞踊もものすごい。
For example, in Nihon Buyo, this is the dance, or sometimes people call it kabuki dance, the dance often associated with kabuki. They also have a number of different movement
そ
patterns.
れに比べて脳は大体肩は多くても50から60の間じゃないかなと思います。
He said we have at least 50 different kinds of.
その中でやらざるを得ないからこそ無限になるんです。
He said, although we have to do, certain choreography, this is the way this particular play is done. But actually, there's an unlimited sense, even in doing that particular movement pattern
Same play.
of that same play and the same kata, the same movement pattern.
だからつなぎ合わせですよね。うまくつなぎ合わせ、仕掛け、開く、意味のある
These
方。
different kata get tied together, they're put together in choreography. So you have a number of kata and you put them together in a certain way, and that is the choreography for it.
ですから意味のある方と何しろ家元はよく注意、先生は上はあんまり見なかった。足元ばっかり見てました。
He said when his teacher was, he was always saying he wasn't looking at your upper body when he was looking and checking how you were performing. He was looking at your feet, always looking at the
足が
feet.
ワン、ツー、スリーっていかなければもう上も崩れてると。
He said, if you're doing something wrong with your feet, the upper body will kind of fall apart. And so he can tell by looking at the feet. And so the head of the school was very important about, very serious and very clear about how you were supposed to use your feet.
で、マスクつけて大きな衣装つけるから、足が白旅で一番目立つんです。
And of course, when you are performing a lot of time, the white tabi are sort of the most important thing that stands out.
ですからもう足が笑って、足が泣いて、足が怒れているわけになる。
And said the feet should laugh, they should cry, they should get angry. It's the feet that you have to express that.
でも見えないし。
He said, if you're wearing a mask and you can get angry with your face, you can't see the face.
ですからもう足しか見せない。
It's what you have to do is show those emotions with your feet.
それと指ですね。
To a certain degree, your hands too.
このためでなく、
Yeah.
本当にちょっとの仕草。
So it's not so much what you do, but the way you do it that makes it individual. Though the things that he creates, the agave,
Yeah.
or those are things that he makes creatively, but it's really in the performance. So, you know, from the age of 7, they're learning all of this choreography, but when they mature, then they're able to.
You make some choices when you do something like that, when you're doing a choreography. But for the most part, you're following sort of more or less a set choreography.
Yeah.
But how you express that, somehow that becomes different. And I think that's sort of going back to your original question. I think there is a little bit of a misunderstanding because when he creates for new pieces,
Yeah.
that's completely new.
Okay.
When he does classical pieces, for the most part, he's going to follow basic
Yeah.
kinds of things, but it's a timing and its own sort of expression within that.
May I just ask, following on from this, very interesting what you said about the feet. The music also gives him a rhythm and a tempo, because you always went, oh, you know, this. Repeated. Is that a basic, really, yeah.
Well, yes, but it's not quite the same as a rhythm you might have there, but certainly it helps create the feel of, I mean, the music, I think he said earlier, really gives a kind of impetus and kinds of, what should I say, energy to how he performs. And so that's where the music, the chant, the tie is very important.
ですから僕が考えるのは、自分は役者だから言葉と思ってるんですね。節がついてても、言葉で喋ってる役者だから。節がつこうがね。それで音楽っていうのは何だとったら声と思うわけ。声。
So he says, as an actor, you might think you're speaking. An actor is speech. But when you think of the music, it's voice and more like chant, I guess you would say.
ですから音楽の声に呼ばれて待っていけるし。
And so when you have the chant going on, だから自分だけでなくて渋滞。
渋滞の際だ。
The chorus, when the
オーケストラとする場合も、ジャズする場合も、声、音は声。
Okay, so when he dances to other kinds of music too. Its voice is what he's hearing in a sense. So in No, he feels that way, but even when he does something else, he stands to sort of jazz. He stands to jazz, he stands to classical music, Western classical music, and he thinks of that as voice.
ですからまあ音楽っていうのは本当に大事なんです、声が。
He says music, I mean, is very important for the voice.
それとやはり役者にとっては言葉が大事です。
But for an actor, words are very important too.
それがうまく合わさってからこそいい劇ができてくる
And
ん
he
だと思っ
said
てます。
that putting those two together is you can create an interesting stage performance.
It always has struck me that No is what Wagner wanted, a Gesamtkunstwerk, because every aspect, the movement, the music, the chant, the story, and the setting, really, all work together to create this. They're not like separate entities. It's like a single organism.
まあそれをまあ演出家がいれば演出家がやってくれるだろうし、まあ演出家のあれになるのは僕は演出していかなきゃならないし。
Yeah, he said if there is a director and he has followed that director, then that he follows the lead of that director, but he's also been the director where he creates.
家元がいたら家元がディレクターなんですね。
Yeah, and he says when there was the head of the school was the director. He had to learn to follow what the head of the school said.
でないと役の肩が崩れてきます。ディレクターがいないと。
Yeah, if there isn't a director, the kata, the movement pattern sort of fail.
ですから外から入ってくる演出家はいません、脳の中には。
But other than that, you don't have directors who come from outside of the no world and direct a no play.
ですから私がしてる時は私がしてとしてのディレクターです。
And when he is the shite actor, the main actor in a play, he actually is the director.
ですからオーケストラだったら指揮者が大体出る音楽音を。
Yeah, with an orchestra, you have a conductor, for example.
ここをもうちょっと伸ばしてほしいとか。
And the conductor can say, I want to stretch this out
指揮者が注文できますけ
It's
ど。
the conductor who can control the
僕た
orchestra.
ちは音楽も渋滞の方もしてが注文できます。
It says, but for the performance, the shite is the one that can say something to the instrumentalist saying, I want to do this in a slightly different way or something.
ここは締めてほしい、ここを
I want
しいとか。
make this slow down just a little bit. I want to speed this up a little bit. For example.
ですから案外10はあるんです、規定の
He
中
says
に。
even within all of these sort of set, whether it's choreography or certain, what you might think of as rules, there's a lot of freedom, is what he often says.
That's clear for the audience, if you feel that he has that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
そうですね、まあそれは観客自身の見方っていうのは10人といろいろ皆さん見方が
Yeah,
違うから
probably from the audience, a lot of people have different ways of looking at what might be done.
だからまあ昔の出会いは客を見て演じろってよく言ったんですよ。
When Zayami used to say, look at the audience and then perform by looking at the audience. But
目利きが今日は来てるか、まあよく知ってる人がよく見てるか。
yeah, if there's someone who is really knowledgeable, is there, so you have to be careful.
そうなってくるとちょっとアカデミックにもしなきゃならない。
Yeah, in those cases, you might have to be a little more academic, is what
同
you
じ
say.
曲でも。
And the same piece might have to be more
あ
academic.
まり知らなかったらまあ松風にしてもわーってこう。
He said maybe if people don't have that, he can do a little playing with it a little bit more, I think. Yeah.
ですから昔はこの人下手だなと思ってたのが今考えてみたらこの人が上手だったんだって分かってきました。
Yeah, he said he used to look at certain people and he would see certain actors and you think, you know, he's not very good. But now as he sees it more, you think, oh, actually, he was pretty good. So,
やはり無になって前っていうのはなかなかできない。
move.
何も考えずに帰るなんて絶対ありえないと思って
It's
ます。
really difficult to not think of anything and just perform. He says, you do think about various things.
どうしてもここで見せてやろうとか。
And he wants to show something at certain points. And, you know, he needs to think that. Sometimes people say, oh, you just have to move is, you know, nothingness and just perform. But he says that's difficult.
Can I ask, because it's my area, about the mask and how that might affect your performance?
やはりね、孫にも一緒、この間もどっかで喋ったんですけどね、孫にも一緒、やはり顔がいやらしくてもですよ、いい衣装つけたり、クリスチャン・ディオールでも着てたら、まあ豪華に見える。
He says, for example, anything, if you're able, if you have a beautiful costume or you wear beautiful clothes, you're going to look very nice. Maybe you yourself aren't, you know.
ですから表でもいい表とやはり自分には合わない表があります。
He says there are really good masks, but even sometimes good masks, they don't fit you, or you maybe don't have as good a relationship with that mask. You know, so it doesn't fit the way you perform.
ですからまあ家元のいい表を借りるよりも僕は100万で買った表の方がいいなと思ってきますよね。
Yeah,
自分のお金出して買ったんだよ。
yeah. He said if he, rather than receiving a mask that the school gave him to use, sometimes he really wanted to have a mask that he paid for and has in his own collection. And
いや
wants to
大
use
事
that.
大事に大事に使うし。
Because he uses it and he's very careful about how he uses that mask.
するとより表に愛情も出てくるから。
So if he has this if he has a certain love for that mask, it works better with him.
ですから表っていうのは不思議なもんです。
He said the mask is really a very strange kind of relationship between the actor and the mask.
Some more questions? Yes.
I've got, I suppose, a two-parter. So you mentioned that you had quite an extensive classical education in Noh. Well, I was wondering, first of all, how long that lasted when you left the school. And then you talked about sort of your interest in kind of contemporary interpretations of Noh theatre, and you talked a lot about Beckett, which I found very interesting. And I was wondering how Western theatre has impacted your interpretation of Noh, especially sort of in Beckett, identity is often quite fluid and quite faceless. And, you know, were you drawn to modernism in particular, or the Western theatrical tradition? What was your creative process there?
そうですね。まずその演劇の方から言いますとね、演劇を西洋演劇っていうのはどっちかというとリアリズムから象徴。
So Western theater is really the difference of realism versus,
Well, symbolic.
に変わっていってるように、脳はもうあれ室町ぐらいからもうシンボリックで来てるんですね。
So
リアリズムを
from
殺して。
No is rather than realism is more symbolic.
ですからそのリアリズムとシンボリ脳の良さをその西洋劇の中にどう生かせるか。
And so when he has been involved in more a Western theater sort of performance, he's thinking about how can he use the symbolism of what he does, the sort of symbolic quality of what he does in that context.
ですからやりやすい劇とやりにくいやはり劇がございます。やはり脚本が大事だから。
And he says, obviously, that the text of a play is very, very important. And there are certain texts that are easier to do something, other texts that are not as easy to do something in that regard, and what he can bring to it.
だから劇をもらうときやはり脚本が良くないといくら頑張ってもできな
Yeah,
い。
he says if the text of the play or piece that he is doing is not an interesting one, it's very difficult for him to do.
それとよく聞くのはどんな衣装ってよく聞く。
And so people often ask, what kind of costume is he going to wear in something like that?
たもとがどれぐらいの大きさ、それで雰囲気が変わってくるし、
Yeah.
たもとがあるのか。
Sometimes, how large a sleeve is he going to have? So I take that back. He's asking what kind of costume he's going to be using.
その衣装によって型も変わってきます。
And because depending on what kind of costume you have, the sort of performance changes, obviously.
ですから2年前はワシントン DC でオペラやった時もこっちも随分苦労しました。
So, for example, a couple of years ago, we were in a performance together, an Monteverdi opera, Orfeo. And doing no, they had him doing no movement. I was in the performance doing music kinds of things. And it really changed depending on the costume that he was using.
ですから衣装によって雰囲気が変わってくるし、役柄も変わってくるから。
And obviously with the costume, the impression that one gives, it changes and how you portray that role.
のはどうしてもやはり基本をスタイルとして作ってますから。
And so no is performed generally in the style of using a kimono.
でも英語のとかになって本当にアメリカ人が主役だし、洋服の場合もあるし、演出するのは難しい時あります。
So when he does a no, for example, when it's an English no, sometimes the theme is not really wearing kimono. You sort of have a Western sort of costume of some sort. And he says that changes things.
能楽堂はね、白旅書かなきゃ回してもらえないんですよ。能楽堂は白旅でないと回してもらえない。
But on a no stage, you really need to perform, for example, with white tabi. You're not going to use these white split-toe, other than white split-toe socks. He has black ones on right now. He doesn't use them on the stage.
洋服着て白旅っていうのもおかしいなとよく思う時あります。
Yeah, he says sometimes when you're performing in a Western sort of costume, but then to use white tabi, that seems strange sometimes.
でもそれを思わせないように作るのが演出の。
But if you use them in such a way, possibly, or do something in such a way, maybe you can use them and make it interesting.
何もリアリズムにならなくてもいいわけです
It
から。
doesn't necessarily have to be realistic.
ですから我々は女になっても男の声で発声してます。
No, for example, even if he's playing the role of a woman, he uses the voice, he uses his regular voice, a male voice. He doesn't change it.
綺麗な女が男の声でわーって来て。
Yeah, and he says you have this beautiful costume and looks like a beautiful woman, then you have this voice that is very strong male voice.
それが不思議ともう終わり方になったら慣れてきます。
And then you slowly get used to that. That's the way things are. Someone else might, if you're thinking realistically, that's not right. But in the no world, you get used to that
そう
kind
いう
of
のはまあ伝統の強さとでも言いましょう
thing.
ね。
And that might be the strength of tradition.
今そういうの作るとなかなかリアリズムじゃ
So
ないし。
but someone first encountering might be very surprised by that. I'm not sure if that entirely answered your question. I think when you asked two questions there, I think the first one got lost there.
Yeah. Yes, the first question was, how long did you
Yes.
train? How long did you train?
Ah,
家元のトレーニングですか。僕はね、親がやってなかったから長かったです、一番。
no.
親が帰るとも言えない。
His father was not a no actor, and so he was actually training for a fairly long time. だけど13歳から、
大体だから25までは職分にはなれないし。
he actually studied on and off. He didn't live with him the entire time there, but he was studying with the head of the school until he was 25.
ですから息子が親が先生だったら先生家元に言いに行けるわけですね。うちの息子こんなことで使うからとか。
Father, I mean, if your father is there, you can probably say something there at school, sort of do things in a different way, but.
ですから息子のためにちょっと稽古に帰らせてくれとか言ってい
Yeah,
けるし。
you know, you can actually even have, if the son or the father asks, the son can even go even a little bit longer, for
で
example.
すから家元は囲ってしまうような感じですね。私を。
Yeah, but in fact, the head of the school kind of sort of kept him in there for a longer period of time.
それが突然アメリカへ出たものだから怒りましたよね。
And then when he went to suddenly was invited to go to the United States and said he's going to the United States, actually the head of the school got angry, a little angry at him at first.
だからいろいろあります。稽古のやり方もいろいろ。
Yeah.
年によって
different ages, you have different ways of having lessons with the school, and so he would even go and he's going to do a no show that when he.
世阿弥に言ってることは本当に時の花って言ってるんです。
So
自分
there are Zeami has this phrase "toki no hana," meaning your hana is how you look. I guess you would say you're at your best, and so a certain age you can really show. But toki no hana is your at this age. What is your hana? What hana means flower, I should say, and flowering at this age or a little bit older, a little bit younger. What is the flower at that particular age?
20歳なら20歳の花がある。
And so when you're 20 years old, you can show a flower for a 20-year-old. When you're 30 years old, you can show a flower for a 30-year-old. It might be a different kind of flower, but.
年を取ってきたらもうやりたいこともやれなくなってきますからね。
But when you get older, maybe you don't always have the chance to do what you'd like to do.
また反対に若い人が老人もんやってもあんまり面白くもそれはないかも
And
しれな
he
い。
said, but younger people, when they do older roles, they're not so interesting, when they do that. So, but that seems to be going.
その時で僕も羽衣でも何十回も待ってますけど。
And he's danced, for example, Hagoromo many times, and many tens of times. He
で
said.
も今はビデオがあるから見直すとやはり違うなと思う。
And he now has video of him performing. He said now when he dances, it's very different from when he was younger dancing.
I think we're going to have to wrap it up because we're just about out of time. I'm going to talk about a couple of things. One is to alert you, if you didn't already know, about the events happening at SOAS. And I think on the SOAS website, I think your discussion about English Noh is scheduled for 10 to 12, but you said it starts at 11.
It's 11 to 12.
11 in the morning.
Yep.
At SOAS, but there are events all day. And you can find these on the Between the Stones website and also on the SOAS website. You just, the way that I do it is go to their little search engine and hit no, and it comes up. It will culminate in a performance of Rockabye and this new play based on a classical Noh play about the woman with the terrible face who gets a new face. I just want to also talk about, once again, this beautiful book, Noh and Kyogen Masks, and we have the mask maker here. I think that one of the things that is extraordinary about this book is that Kitazawa-san has created not only masks for classical Noh plays, but masks for some of these plays that are inventions of Theatre no Gaku. So Crazy Jane, and Yeats, as you probably know, was fascinated by the Noh and wrote Noh plays himself. So At the Hawk's Well, and other plays have been performed by Matsui Sensei, and sometimes in masks especially created for him. And some of the other performances, the Blue Moon over Memphis, for example, the book has the mask of Elvis. Just saying.
オペンハイマーも入っております。
Yes.
And Oppenheimer, yes. So there are these
Different plays.
extraordinary masks, but made with all of the same skills and dare I say it, perfection of the standard classical Noh masks. And the book is available from Jeanette, who is one of the authors, along with Richard. And the artist himself is there, and there is wine, and there is juice, and there
Please have a
is
look at
ginger
at
ale.
these, because it is a very nice book.
Yes.
You get a chance to look at it.
Thank you all very, very much, and thank you, Matsui Sensei. Thank you.